This video is sponsored by me. Yeah, that's right, me. I've now started YouTube as my full-time job, so thank you for all your support in making this possible, and I hope you enjoy the ride. My Patreon link will be in the description, and I appreciate all those who pledged to support the channel, and all those who already have pledged. So let's do something a little different. Let's look at the Spanish Empire, specifically the Habsburgs, and let's look at how and why the Habsburg Spanish Empire fell from a position of being the superpower of the 1500s to a secondary power barely 200 years later in 1700. A lot of people like to blame Charles II for this collapse. Yeah, that Charles II, Habsburg chin, the inbred one, become a bit of a meme. However, quite simply, his medical issues were, well, one, not his fault, and two, and quite simply, yeah, I will die on this hill, Charles II did nothing wrong. Now, public service announcement first though. I will likely say the occasional naughty word, so I might recommend some headphones, and well, secondly, I will be calling the last king of Habsburg Spain Carlos II going forward throughout this video. This is to distinguish him from the King of England at the time, who was also called Charles II. Carlos is also, after all, the correct name because, well, he is a Spanish king, so, it fits. But for the title and the thumbnail, I have written Charles II in order to appeal to my wider English-speaking audience who know him as Charles and not Carlos. I do kind of hope at the end of this you'll start calling him Carlos as well because, well, in my opinion academically it's just better. He's a Spanish king, call him Carlos II. But with that out of the way, let's get into it. The decline of the Spanish Empire during the reign of Carlos II was not solely due to his medical conditions, of which there were numerous. And yes, this was due to inbreeding. Rather, though, it was a long and drawn-out process of systemic decline beginning during the reign of his predecessor, Philip II. The decision by Philip II to engage in never-ending wars of religion set the conditions for Spain's eventual decline, and both economically and, well, politically as well, and militarily even. These wars caused tremendous economic stress to the Spanish Empire and further opened up the Spanish colonies to raiding by the Dutch and English vessels, at the time when the convoys from these colonies were the only thing keeping Spain afloat. Although these issues would seemingly be dealt with thanks to a series of peace treaties under his son and successor Philip III, the Spanish monarchy and Spanish position, mostly due to a lack of training and education for the new and young monarchs who really had no clue what they were doing, well, the position was still tenuous, and it would become even more tenuous. A key issue at the time being that the rule of the Spanish Empire would be handed over to the king's favourites, known as validos. For those who are a fan of fantasy, such as Game of Thrones, think of a valido as a hand of the king, but in a literal, the king's so young he has no clue what he is doing sort of way. As valido, the Duke of Lerma, during the reign of Philip III, saw both the height of the Spanish Empire, but also the continuous economic woes that would make the current US debt seem like a funny joke. The unpopularity of this form of government with a seemingly disinterested king would continue through the reign of Philip IV, who was also highly untrained upon his ascension, and his favourite, the Count Duke Olivares, was, well, so hawkish that he would make a 2003's George Bush blush, had this weird belief that Spain could gain its position on the world stage and its power through military victory in the Spanish Netherlands, not taking the hint that after literal decades that the Dutch weren't exactly going to stop murdering the Spanish just because they asked them nicely or pointed a sword at them. And therefore, Olivares would reignite the wars of Philip II. This policy would therefore bring Spain into direct conflict with a resurgent France, and due to the economic instability of Spain from all of these reigns, a series of increasingly powerful revolts broke out throughout the Spanish Empire's European holdings, when reform was attempted by the Count Duke. For clarity's sake, this is the Spanish Empire's holdings at the time. It's not just Spain, it includes the Netherlands or Belgium, because the northern half is revolting and has been revolting for a very long time in this part of history. It also includes southern Italy, Naples, for example, and it's quite extensive. As such, the situation facing Carlos II on the death of his father, Philip IV, yeah, there are 3 Philips we're talking about here, it will get confusing, don't worry, you'll figure it out, was therefore that he inherited an empire on the very verge of collapse at the age of 3. He was unable to govern in his own right at first due to his age, but also the fact he was medically infirm, and, well, Carlos II's reign saw a back and forth struggle to make matters worse between his regency councils, with fundamental issues plaguing the reign. which had been set in place by his predecessors, meaning that the Spanish Empire, now unable to pay for its wars, was seen by nearby France under Louis XIV as the so-called sick man of Europe, not too unlike how the Ottomans were viewed in 1914. Further war and economic struggle, coupled with Carlos II's inability to have children due to just a monumentally bad level of inbreeding, was the proverbial final straw, as upon his death the lack of an heir triggered the War of the Spanish Succession. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. Now let's go back and let's look at this decline. And let's start with Philip II, work our way through Philip III, the fourth, and then we'll finally get into Carlos's reign. The beginning of the end of Habsburg Spain truly began with the reign of Philip II. And yes, for those who are wondering, it is that Philip of the Spanish Armada fame. The revolt in the Spanish Netherlands, caused by an increasing taxation demand and, incessant persecution of Protestants, played a significant role in the decline of Spanish power. In 1566, the Protestant preachers in the Netherlands sparked a series of clerical revolts known as the Iconoclastic Fury. These riots were predominantly orchestrated by Calvinist Protestants, and they targeted specifically Catholic iconography and sacred objects, chiseling the faces off statues because they believed that the veneration of saints, which is predominating in the Catholic faith, was an affront to God. Now, for those who aren't up to date with their Protestant Christian law, Calvinists are about a 7 on the scale of religious nutcases, a 10 being whatever passes for Christianity in the southern United States, but they're about a 7. In European terms, they're pretty high up there. For the highly devout Catholic Philip II, the actions of the Dutch rebels were essentially satanic and sacrilegious, and the Spanish response was to attempt to suppress the revolt through military force. Although effective in suppressing the initial revolt, the nearby Protestant England, although not Calvinist, but he get a piss in Spain's coffee because why not, was able to provide sanctuary to the rebels, and the revolt would from there spiral into a conflict that would not effectively end until the reign of Philip IV. The actions of the Spanish forces in the Low Countries would become known as the Spanish Fury, and would involve brutal suppression across the territory. A primary example of this being the following excerpt from the time. Spanish soldiers here, after having taken over, sacked and burned part of the city of Maastricht, killing a large number of bourgeois and other inhabitants. It's a small extract, but it goes to allude to, how brutal the Spanish response could be in many ways. This would become known as the 80 Years' War. Yeah, I said that right, not 8, 80 Years' War. This conflict would prove to be an ongoing ulcer for the Spanish crown, and is really known today by the tongue-in-cheek title of the Spanish-Vietnam War. It significantly drained the treasury due to the cost of maintaining a large standing army, not to mention when the Dutch discovered just how good they were at boat building and, boat usage as well. Philip's refusal to reach an accommodation with the Protestant forces, though, was not limited to the Netherlands, and perhaps more famously, he would further commit to a highly destructive war with England. Side note though, I will be coming back and covering the Dutch Revolt and War for Independence in depth sometime, so watch this space. It is truly a fascinating period in history, and it's completely mental in many cases, some of the things the Dutch were able to pull off. To my Dutch viewers, and yeah, I know there's a few of you, you can now scream Netherlands mentioned, followed by spamming the flag in the comments. I've seen you do it before, by all means do it again. Philip II's uncompromising commitment to war at any cost in order to defend his Catholic faith would lead Spain directly into a crippling commitment in the 80 Years' War, as I mentioned, but also a commitment to defend the Catholic faith that would drive Spain into a conflict with England. The war against England was fundamentally justified by the Spanish and the English on religious grounds. At the launching of the Spanish Armada, the Jesuit priest Pedro de Ribera claimed that Elizabeth, the Queen of England, had ordered the Catholic preachers to be silent and has ordered the heretics to speak. The war against England would continue into the reign of Philip III of Spain and James I of England, with both Elizabeth and Philip refusing to make peace. Again, this was largely done on religious grounds. The destruction of Spanish naval forces at the Battle of Gravelines in 1588 and further losses during the Armada campaign due to, weather and the coast of Scotland being not the best place to run a wooden ship into, were the real low points in the war for the Spanish, and proved to be ruinously expensive, with the Spanish debt burden being up until this point manageable, but this was completely crippling. And in 1597, Spain would be forced to declare bankruptcy. Further to the war in England and the Netherlands, Philip II became heavily involved within the French wars of religion. Again, he was unable to compromise his Catholic belief. Now, I might touch on these wars one day, but good lord, they are complicated, as are with most things political in French, but all you really need to know for this topic is that they were expensive, and they cost the Spanish significantly. So that's 3 major wars. You'd think that would be enough, but wait, there's one more war, and it was against the Ottomans. And this ended with the Battle of Lepanto. Well, ended's a strong word. It really sort of fizzled out after the Battle of Lepanto when the Holy League fell apart. And this was arguably the height of the Spanish power in the Mediterranean, as a Christian fleet under Don Juan of Austria, a Spanish prince, don't question the name, Habsburg's gonna Habsburg, walloped the Ottoman navy at Lepanto. There has been some conjecture on whether Lepanto was all that important, however it was very clearly, in the long term, a major Spanish and Christian strategic victory. If anyone would like to know more about the Battle of Lepanto, please let me know in the comments, and I might make a video on it. I've got the makings of a script there that explains why it was such a victory for Christian forces, in spite of Turkish and, modern Turkish attempts to downplay the Christian victory, but also Ottoman attempts to downplay the Christian victory. It truly was a tremendous victory. Anyway, back to the main story. The cumulative fiscal and military costs imposed by ongoing and seemingly endless wars would be inherited by Philip III, who, unlike his father, didn't have adequate training nor preparation to take the throne. And when I say adequate, I mean he had basically no training to take the throne. He was told to go pray in the Escorial Palace and basically, well, that was it. And the decision by Philip III, therefore, to give governorship of the empire to his favourite, the Duke of Lerma, well, it wasn't exactly going to go well. The Spanish, and well, they were used to having a pretty switched-on king, and this was not going to be the case for them going forward. For his foreign policy faults, though, Philip II was a king who had received a significant amount of education in how to rule, and his day-to-day running of the Spanish Empire was highly effective. But, and this is a really big but, Philip II did not ensure the same level of attention to his heir's education. Philip III came to the throne in 1598, and he was only 17, and has been described by historians such as Wedgwood and Elliott as a pallid and anonymous creature, whose focus was on recreational activities and prayer. Philip III gave over the control of the governorate of Spain to his newly appointed Valedor, the Duke of Lerma, who I've mentioned a couple times already, and following a series of, horrific defeats, again to the Dutch and also the English, pursued a policy known as the Pax Hispanica. This differs a little to the Pax Romana, which is known as the Roman enforced peace, or the Pax Britannica, the British enforced peace. The Pax Hispanica, well, its goal was a little different. It was to simply withdraw Spain from as many wars as possible, even if the peace treaties were not entirely in Spain's favour. Lerma would sideline the previous advisors of Philip II and consolidate his power by appointing yes-men who he favoured to administer the apparatus of state, while Lerma himself remained close to the king to basically get what he wanted. In many ways, Lerma was acting like the KGB in the 70s before it was cool. This will come as no shock to anyone, but the administration of Lerma was one of nepotism and corruption, with the Duke regularly treating the Spanish treasury as his personal piggy bank. An example of this is his annual income rising from 8,027 ducats in 1598 to 932,073 ducats 20 years later. Lerma's corruption and his mismanagement increased the speed of economic decline within the Spanish economy, as it led to a cycle of inflation and deflation. I'm not an economist, but deflation is the really bad one. And although he was dismissed in 1618, the Duke of Lerma, who proceeded to quickly make himself a cardinal to avoid persecution before he was dismissed, of course he did, had caused severe damage to the Spanish state's economy. And in addition to this, the already destabilised Spain from all these successively crap financial decisions, they decided to do something that was, well, there's no better word for it. They engaged in ethnic cleansing. The decree expelling the Moriscos was signed and put into effect in the year 1609, and it was unpopular both abroad but also inside Spain, and furthered the economic damage already made to the state. For hundreds and hundreds of years, this was the religious map in Spain, and you can see that a significant part of the Iberian Peninsula was ruled by an Islamic kingdom or series of Islamic kingdoms, following the conquest of the region by invaders from modern-day Morocco. The invasion actually was only stopped by the Frankish general Charles Martel at Tours in 732 AD, and this is largely the sole reason Western Europe has remained a Christian part of the world, and it was not part of the Islamic world. Now, the decision to expel these people was made on the basis that there was a genuine fear that the Ottomans, if they ever did land, would have the assistance of a major fifth column, and that this fifth column would rise up to return Al-Andalus to Islam, Al-Andalus being the Islamic name for Spain. In a reversal of his policy of peace as well, Spain, upon the death of Philip III, had already become involved in the 30 Years' War in Central Europe. And again, I won't go into the 30 Years' War too much because it's not too relevant here, but it is one of the most destructive conflicts known to man, and every time it came close to ending, another power would join in. It was fundamentally a war of religion between Catholics and Protestants, at least at first. The French just made that even more complicated, but France, whatever, they aren't entirely relevant here. The long short is, the war started in the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, Bohemia, that kind of area, and the Swedish then joined and gave the Protestants an upper hand under Gustavus Adolphus, and then Spain joined and gave the Catholics another hand, etc., etc. TLDR, it was a bloody miserable affair, and at the end of it, with an already increasingly strained economy, Spain found itself in the position of possible collapse through domestic rebellion. The reign immediately preceding that of Carlos II, though, would highlight just how far the rot had set into the Spanish Empire, both politically and economically. As with Philip III, Philip IV ascended with little to no training, because of course he did, and the king would often refer to his valido, the Count Duke Olivares. Note that the chins are getting bigger and bigger. Yeah, inbreeding is going on here a lot, but we'll get to that later. Olivares recognised the need for reform and centralisation within the Spanish holdings in Europe. However, the vastly different political structures of the individual kingdoms and dukedoms within the Iberian Peninsula led to an increasingly hostile domestic situation. This is the point where we have to stop and talk about Spanish politics, and bear with me, I'm going to try and make it make sense. This is a massive oversimplification though. For most people, they are aware that the United Kingdom, we're talking about Britain here, includes 4 countries, the kingdoms of England and Scotland, the Principality of Wales and Northern Ireland. These 4 nations together form the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But these countries are all quite different especially politically, culturally, etc. For example, the current heir to the throne of the United Kingdom is the Prince of Wales. This is William. This means shit all to the people in Scotland, where Prince William holds the title, the Duke of Rothesay. Now, what does this have to do with Spain? Shit all, but I have a majority English-speaking audience, so it will be somewhat more familiar to you because Spain has a similar construct. Spain in itself is a mixture of multiple kingdoms, princedoms, and the like. The only reason Spain exists at all as Spain is because the 2 main Spanish kingdoms in 1474 were ruled by Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand V of Aragon, who got married and ruled as co-monarchs, thus entering the kingdoms into a personal union under their successors. Spain as an identity isn't really a thing until the 1700s, and the individual regions during this period really still saw themselves as, well, individual regions. The lingua franca, or spoken language of Spain, Spanish, is not actually Spanish. It's based on Castile. It's Castilian, not Catalan, not Basque. It's sort of is the native Castilian language which has morphed into what we now know as Spanish. This obviously has a flow-on effect throughout the Americas and, well, the Philippines as well. Even today, the Basque, the Catalans, and some other areas refuse to see themselves as Spanish. I'm not saying you are Spanish, Basque, please leave me alone, you're like the IRA but 10 times scarier. Philip II complicated this further when he yoinked the throne of Portugal, which just made it even more complicated during the Iberian Union. That is a hell of a tangent, but it's important to know for what comes next, I swear. Further to the destabilising of Spanish rule domestically, the hawkish policy and belief of Olivares that Spain could regain her position and power and prestige through the destruction and final end to the ongoing 80 Years' War in the Netherlands with a Spanish victory, opened up Spain to another cycle of endless war. The now resurgent and powerful France, though, under Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King, because of course, took great advantage of the economically weak Spain inherited by Philip IV, and it proceeded to engage itself in a series of wars aimed at further breaking Spanish power in Europe, and furthering France as the domestic dominant continental power. The immense cost of the continual state of war and further weakening our economic position emboldened outright rebellion in Catalonia, Italy, and Portugal, with each of these territories attempting to secede from Madrid due to the burdens being enforced by the crown, mostly down to tax and soldiers, conscription, that kind of stuff. A key example of how decentralised the Spanish holdings were was the Portuguese Rebellion of 1640, the catalyst being a request for Portuguese forces to suppress the ongoing revolt in Catalonia. Yes, Catalonia was revolting back then too. Not much changes. Again, like I mentioned, Catalans don't really see themselves as Spanish. They like to, make that very clear if you ever speak to them. So revolt's not that uncommon. The continuous wars and rebellion were compounded further with news that there was an ongoing plot in Andalusia to declare an independent kingdom in southern Spain, highlighting just how precarious the situation had become for Madrid. The reign of Philip IV is therefore the period where Spanish decline under the Habsburg monarchy greatly increased in speed, like a slingshot being pulled all the way back. And then, finally, with the rebellions releasing. It's truly a miracle that Spain didn't collapse internally during this period. It's somewhat quite shocking that it didn't. The more you look into this period, it's really, in every single way, Spain should have collapsed. To use a modern perspective, you have a look at Germany. It's like if the entirety of the Rhineland, Bavaria and Baden, and, the northwest of Germany all suddenly declared their independence at once. It would be completely crippling, and there's no way Berlin could theoretically control it. And in many ways, that's the same for Spain. It's really quite shocking that Spain was able to contain this. Philip IV, though, would die, leaving the throne to a very, very sickly and highly disabled 3-year-old child, Carlos II, under the regency of his German wife and niece, Mariana of Austria, who would engage in direct competition with his illegitimate son, Don Juan José de Austria, for power. This is not Don Juan of Austria that won the Battle of Lepanto. He's long dead. This is a different person called Don Juan de José de Austria. Again, Habsburgs, they're not creative with names. I'm sorry, there's multiple Philips, there's multiple Juans. I can't change it. This is just what the Habsburg Spanish were like. As the only surviving legitimate son of Philip IV, Carlos II succeeded his father in 1665, aged only 3 years old. Given his age and clear mental and physical infirmity, the administration of the Spanish Empire therefore fell to a regency council under the Queen Mother, Mariana of Austria. Carlos II has unfortunately become the butt of all the jokes about Habsburg inbreeding, and many people have placed all the blame for the Spanish Habsburg collapse on him. However, Carlos II, there's not much he could have done. He had a developmental delay, multiple intellectual disabilities, skeletal deformity, recurrent infections, epilepsy, infertility, and, some scientists have gone so far as suggesting that due to the level of inbreeding so bad it would make a lost cause a blush, he also had a chromosomal imbalance. His jaw, that famous Habsburg jaw that I highlighted a bit with Philip IV, was now so out of place that he couldn't eat properly and would survive on a less than appealing diet, spilling soup all over himself, and really eventually earning the nickname Carlos the Bewitched. I do quite feel sorry for Carlos II here. There's not much he could have done. That said, multiple sources at the time do say he was witty, sharp, and quite switched on, and that in reality, although with all of these things holding him down, he was truly a prisoner of his own body, and had he had the chance, he would have made a fantastic king. His regency council, though, designed to rule in his stead until he reached the majority age of 14, found itself in constant domestic struggle between Don Juan de José de Austria, somebody so charismatic and he would have been an amazing king, and the Queen Mother, and this would paralyse the Spanish Empire's already weakened ability to respond to French aggression. Very nearly the situation was resolved when Don Juan de José de Austria led a popular coup, one of the first in history, to seize power, with the support of the people nonetheless. But he died shortly thereafter, and such is life and such is history. A key example of the paralysis and inability to stop French advances and French encroachment on the Spanish lands and empire was the increasing reliance of foreign support to stay afloat. During the 9 Years' War, Barcelona was saved from capitulation by an English fleet, something totally unthinkable during the reign of Philip II. The idea of an English Royal Navy fleet sailing to Spain's rescue was enough to make the Spaniards during the reign of Philip II spin in their graves. We've reached the period in history truly where the sea starts speaking English, and the boss music for the world is Rule Britannia the moment you get foot in a canoe. But in saying that, there is evidence that attempts were made in rectifying the economic situation through measures such as breaking the monopoly on trade held by Seville from the Spanish colonial empire, and allowing the establishment of companies within Spain that were not too dissimilar to the wealthy British and Dutch East India companies. When I say the monopoly on Seville, all the imports that came from the Spanish Empire, legally speaking, had to pass through the port of Seville. There was a true monopoly, and this was tremendously bad when you have an empire that is so teetering on the brink of collapse that corruption is basically Tuesday, and well, everything has to go through the one port, so yada yada yada, you know what's coming next. These decisions would have a positive impact on the Spanish economic situation, as inflation was stabilised and trade was increased, and fundamentally the systemic issues that had plagued Spain since the reign of Philip II remained in place, with further repeated conflicts breaking out against a now seemingly unstoppable France. Although Spain would now have a powerful continental ally, and multiple other allies, including the British, just purely because they didn't want the French to get too powerful, because, most of the European power politics at this time is just making sure someone doesn't get too powerful. The Spanish monarchy would be further weakened by the inability of Carlos II to wield power in his own right, and he couldn't also ensure the line of succession, and the major powers began to start working on contingency plans for when, not if, Carlos II died without an heir. There's actually a diary of an English diplomat in Madrid who's keeping a diary and reporting every second day or so to the English Parliament and the King of England that this is the condition of the King of Spain today, this is how we might die, this is the condition today, this is the condition today. And it's really quite sad to read, because they all know he's dying. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and there's no children coming. Therefore, Carlos II, while plagued with medical issues, he really wasn't solely responsible for the Spanish decline during the 1600s. He did quite a bit, as much as he could at least with his deformities and conditions, to make a difference. During a riot, for example, in Madrid, he was propped up on the balcony with stilts and basically hung up like a string puppet to address the crowds to make them relax a bit so they would stop rioting. Rather, the Spanish decline, it's not his fault, as I've said a couple of times now. And it's really a systemic issue that began during the reign of Philip II. And it really begins with Philip's commitment to ongoing wars to the state of total ruination. The near constant state of war faced by Spain from the reign of Philip II caused multiple bankruptcies and destabilised the Spanish state to the point that during the reign of Philip IV, multiple rebellions broke out and threatened the very existence of the Spanish Empire. Coupled with entrenched corruption during the reign of Philip III and an unstable regency council, the reign of Carlos II faced tremendous odds from the beginning. The empire inherited by Carlos II was far from stable nor prosperous, and attempts were made, and they were to an extent successful in redressing this rampant inflation and economic decline, but his medical condition meant that no matter how effective his reign was, the lack of a clear succession would almost certainly guarantee that a significant conflict would erupt when he died. The now resurgent and powerful France meant that Spain, bankrupt from her near-constant state of war with the Dutch, along with the embroilment in other wars, created the situation where Spain could not effect a sufficient military response to check French aggression. Therefore, while the medical conditions of Carlos II ensured the War of the Spanish Succession would take place, and Habsburg rule in Spain would effectively end, the king's health cannot be blamed for the systemic issues that caused the Spanish decline. This is on Philip II from the outset, and then it gets worse through Philip III and Philip IV. So in short, Carlos II did nothing wrong, and honestly, he should be cut a fair bit of slack. By all accounts, he was a good person who suffered due to deformity caused by horrific inbreeding. And I honestly, for one, feel bad for the guy. Bit different, bit more lectury. So if you enjoyed, please do like, comment, subscribe, join the Patreon, join the Discord. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.